Good morning, our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start the event. Thank you for your patience. If you can kindly seat it, we'll appreciate it. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to host today's event. My name is Mo, and I will be serving as the MC today. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for taking the time to attend. To ensure the smooth progress of the program, please set your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you. To begin the event, we'll start by watching a short video presentation, We Go Together.
We clearly remember that horrible day. We remember you, who came from a great distance and put your life on the line. We remember warm friendship that protected each other in the terrible war. We realized that we could defend freedom and peace because we were together. So we made a promise that we go together as partners based on an alliance forged in blood. And we have kept our promise, that beautiful promise, over these years. In the world with uncertainties, our solid friendship and alliance are laying a foundation of global peace and prosperity. Now, the path we are taking together will be a cornerstone of global peace. Let's join our hands and jump again. We go together. 같이 갑시다.
I hope you enjoyed the video, We Go Together. It highlights the US-Korea alliance and the partnership between the two countries. Just as our two nations have overcome challenges together in the past, may our partnership continue to grow even stronger in the future. Truly a beautiful and meaningful video. Next, let me introduce our distinguished guests. Due to time constraints, please just wait from your seat when your name is called. We kindly ask for a round of applause per introduction. In the case we introduce some guests as a group, we kindly ask for your generous understanding. First of all, representing the Korean government, we are honored to have Consul General Jo Gi-jong with us today. Next, we are honored to welcome today's keynote speakers, General John Tillery and Mr. Clifton Daniel. We are also joined by Karen Robinson, Program Director at the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, New York Times bestselling author Eric Wilson, and film producer Matthew Browning. We're pleased to have Chris Larson with us today, who will be moderating the forum. Session 1 speakers and panelists, please give us a wave. Over there. Session 2 speakers and panelists, a wave from you as well. Session 3 speakers, let's see your hands. And finally, Session 4 speakers and panelists, please give a wave too. We also have many dedicated teachers with us today. I'd like like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Lastly, we're deeply honored to welcome the grandson of Korean War hero Major Charles Jr. Laurie, a recipient of the highest military honors from the Korean United States. And warmly welcome Mr. Prasad Mata and his family who have traveled from afar to be with us today. And taking the stage today are our K-pop star Kim Tae-ha and Mr. Cho Jae-yoon, CEO of Bad Boss Company, who will be adding a special touch to our event. Lastly, we are honored to welcome Mr. Chung Gu-do, Chairman of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation, Mr. Yang Hee-chan, President of the Nogunli Victims Association. There are many more distinguished guests with us today, but due to time constraint, we kindly ask for your understanding that we cannot introduce everyone individually. Now we'll move on to welcome remark by Mr. Chung Gu-do. He will be delivering his speech in English. He's practiced a lot, so please be understanding there are mistakes. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Welcome remarks. First and foremost, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of you for attending this forum. The 75th anniversary of Korean War and Nogunli incident. Beyond the past and toward the future. And commemoration events from Korea and the United States. On this occasion of holding the Nogunli International Peace Forum, we have invited important guests from all walks of life, such as teachers and professors, Korean War veterans and their bereaved families, Korea defense veterans, writers, and professionals in the film industry who have shown keen interest in the Nogunli incident. Above all, it's my honor to have two prestigious keynote speakers here today. My sincere gratitude goes to John Harold Tillery Jr., a retired United States Army four-star general who served as command of United States Forces Korea and dedicated his life to the peace and the security of Korean Peninsula. And to Clifton Truman Daniel, the oldest grandson of a former United States President Harry S. Truman, who made a swift decision to dispatch American troops right after the outbreak of Korean War. As you know, I one of the bereaved families of the Nogunli incident. Back in 1950, my mother was seriously injured, and her 5-year-old son and 2 years old daughter were killed by U.S. forces in the incident. Since I grew up watching my mother crying and grieving the loss of her children, I always wanted to find out the truth of Nogunli incident. Since the 1960s, my father had dedicated his life to uncovering the truth of incidents. I also joined my father's lifelong efforts and have been working on this work for the last 35 years to reveal the truth of the incident and restore the dignity of victims since 1991. Currently, I serve as chairman of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation, an official non-profit entity dedicated to the operation of the Nogunli Peace Park that the Korean government established to commemorate Nogunli victims according to the Nogunli Special Act. The Nogunli Peace Park is located in 영동군, a transportation hub of the country that connects Seoul and Busan. Ironically, this area was strategically an important location during the Korean War. The Korean War broke out on June 25, 1950, as North Korea executed a surprise attack on the south. The U.S. forces faced shortage of heavy weapons and personnel, so that they focused on defensive battles. Then, the battles of Yeongdong occurred in late July. Despite such difficult conditions and circumstances, young soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division and 25th Infantry Division bravely fought and trained the Korean People's Army for 8 days, allowing the UN forces valuable time to set up the Busan perimeter. Unfortunately, however, the Battle of Yeongdong came at heavy cost. About 400 US soldiers were killed in action at the Battle of Yeongdong, and about 37,000 US soldiers lost their lives during the Korean War. Undoubtedly, South Korea enjoys the freedom and economic prosperity it has today, thanks to their profound sacrifice. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Korean War. However, the remains of at least 33 US soldiers who were killed or missing in action still buried in the unnamed fields and mountains of Yeongdong. Indeed, it is a sad reality. Today, July 25th, is the day when the Nogunli incident began 75 years ago. According to the records written during the incident that lasted 5 days, about 400 refugees were sacrificed. I do believe that both the refugees sacrificed during the Nogunli incident and the US soldiers perished during the Battle of Yeongdong are, after all, victims of Korean War. To this end, the Association of Bereaved Families of the Nogunli incident sent an official letter to the Korean Ministry of National Defense early this year to deal with this matter on the excavation of remains of US soldiers. The President of Association of the Bereaved Families of the incident and I, as Chairman of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation, officially visited the Ministry of National Defense agents for killed in action recovery and identification, and asked for the agency cooperation to excavate the remains of US soldiers without delay. I sincerely pray that their remains can be returned soon to their families. Okay? We have prepared this forum in Washington, D.C. to remember the US soldiers sacrificed in the Battle of Yeongdong, and let people know about remains of 33 US soldiers that should be excavated and returned to their home, as well as commemorate the Nogunli incident's victims and US soldiers sacrificed during the Korean War. As we heal the pain of the past together, let us overcome the past and build a strong friendship and alliance between Republic of Korea and the United States to usher in bright future. To this end, the Nogunli International Peace Foundation has prepared long-term vision to change the pain of war into seeds of peace. Honorably, Korean War veterans and the bereaved family of Nogunli, I hope we can work together with the people of both Korea and the United States to promote world peace and human rights. As we said, the theme of the forum is the 75th anniversary of the Korean War and the Nogunli incident. Beyond the past and toward the future, let us move forward together. We go together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jang Budo, for your warm and thoughtful remark. Next, we'll move on to the congratulatory remark from Consul General Cho Ki-jong, who represents the government of Republic of Korea.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? On behalf of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the United States, congratulations on successfully hosting the first International Peace Forum. Thank you to Chairman Jung Gu-do and everyone at the Nogunli International Peace Foundation for organizing today's event, as well as the Secretary General Joseph Carr and the members of the Korean War Legacy Foundation for their assistance. My special thanks also go to all the distinguished speakers, including General Killaley of the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation and Mr. Clifton Daniel, grandson of President Harry Truman. Human history could well be described as a history of war. Even today, wars continue in Ukraine, in Gaza, and around the world. Wherever war takes place, it creates devastation and suffering for innocent civilians, including hidden pains and scars that often remain unseen by the world. The Nogunli incident could have become one of those overlooked tragedies. However, it did not. Instead, it gained international attention and recognition thanks largely to the efforts of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation and the bereaved families of the victims. The courage of the American press in revealing the truth and decisive cooperation from the Korean and US government. President Bill Clinton issued an official expression of regret. The Korean and US governments conducted a joint investigation and undertook efforts to recover remains of US soldiers. The Republic of Korea enacted a special act on the Nogunli incident to restore the honor and dignity of the victims and support their healings. And a peace park was established in 영동군. This recognition is because of the unwavering commitment of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation, the bereaved family, and the support and interest of many of the leaders here with us together today. So I want to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to all of you for that commitment. In particular, congratulations to Chairman Jung Gu-do, who was named RFK Defender by Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights last year, an important recognition by the international community of the Foundation's human rights effort. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. In the ensuing years, Korea and the United States have stood as steadfast allies, defending freedom and peace. Working together, we have achieved shared prosperity through close cooperation in security, economy, technology, and culture. And despite rapidly changing global dynamics, the strength and importance of our alliance continues to grow. This International Peace Forum is a valuable opportunity to strengthen cooperation between our two countries in the areas of human rights and peace. The forum's theme, Beyond the Past and Toward the Future, is particularly appropriate because together we seek to move beyond the pain and wounds of the past toward healing, recovery, mutual progress, and to build a hopeful future. Once again, thank you to everyone who has helped to prepare this forum. I hope it is both productive and meaningful, and I extend my best wishes to everyone here. Thank you so much. Have a great day today.
Thank you very much, Professor Cho. Before we move on to the keynote speeches, we'll take a commemorative photo of the key distinguished guests in front. May I please invite the following individuals to the stage. Consul General Cho I know you just returned to your seats, but sorry. And our keynote speakers, General John Tillery, Mr. Clifton Timberman Daniel, Mr. Chung Gudo, who just gave us a wonderful speech, and Mr. Yang Hae-chan. Let's gather with the stage backdrop for the photo.
Okay? Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't know when to move.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. You're welcome to go back to your seats. Now we'll move on to the keynote speech. But first, let's watch a short video about our keynote speaker, General Tillery. It is our honor to now welcome the General Tillery, a true symbol of the U.S. and South Korea alliance. Thank you for your service, General Tillery.
I don't know who's in those pictures, but I practiced English too today, so I'm speaking English. Chairman, Consul General, distinguished members of this program, very interesting program, very important, veterans and family members who in fact have done so much for our alliance and for Korea, and honored guests. Thank you, Chairman, for the kind invitation. I'm honored to speak at this important forum regarding our alliance and future challenges. But the first thing I must say is these are my thoughts. I don't work for any government. I don't propose any solutions, but these are thoughts that I have about our alliance that has been strong and has, in fact, guaranteed peace and stability on the peninsula and and in the region. So we commemorate today the 75th anniversary of the start of the war. This week, we also commemorate did I do something wrong there? This week, we also commemorate the 72nd signing of the armistice. Not a peace treaty, but the armistice, which in fact, we will have a ceremony at the wall and at the memorial this Sunday. And we also pray for all the victims of the Korean War and Nogunri. So we have multiple reasons for being here and honoring this great alliance. Our alliance was forged in the aftermath of the Korean War and remains a cornerstone of peace and stability on the peninsula, really in the entire region of Northeast Asia. It's ironclad, and it will remain ironclad if we insist that it remains ironclad. In a real sense, in my view, I've always said this, it's a model alliance for the United States and the Republic of Korea. But in order to be a model alliance, which this has had, you have to have the will to work together, as we've talked about, and also as demonstrated in the video that we saw of going together. There are challenges. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that I've read about, that I understand, that are in the future. I'll also talk about future requirements, and I'll also discuss some of the imperatives that I believe we must insist on to retain peace and stability. As a result of our alliance, and in the aftermath of a devastating war, the Republic of Korea has become a vibrant democracy, a global economy, the 11th or 10th largest economy in the free world, a technological leader whose citizens are well educated and who have a tremendous work ethic. Wonderful people in the Republic of Korea. But let us not forget, and the chairman said so in his presentation, that it was achieved through the blood of many Koreans and Americans who fought for democracy against an unfettered aggression by North Korea and China. We forget that. We forget what caused the war. As chairman of the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation, Colonel Lee, who is the director, please raise your hand, Colonel Lee, who's the director of the foundation, and I'm the chairman of it. We completed renewing the 30-year-old memorial and completed a wall of remembrance 2 years ago. In fact, the Korean people, through the Korean government, paid for that renovation. On that wall, we have 36,634 Americans who were killed during a 3-year war. And on that wall, for the first time, on any memorial in Washington, D.C., we have 7,174 Korean augmentees of the United States Army with American soldiers. If you haven't seen it, you should. This next Sunday, we're having a 10 o'clock ceremony to commemorate the 72nd anniversary of the signing of the armistice. The alliance has not been stable. And unfortunately, many people think it's a paternalistic alliance. It's not. It's evolved into a strategic partnership which encompasses all domains, as our Consul General said, economic, military, technology, and most important, people to people. Partnership, friendship, that's what builds alliances. So there are challenges for the future. And we should not look through a microscope, which many people do, a short-term microscope. Let's see what we can do today. We need to look through a strategic wide aperture sensor. We need to think about what does the main threat, Kim Jong-un, what are his objectives? Have they changed? Does he still wish unification under communist regime without conflict? Does he still wish to separate or build a wedge between the United States and America? Does he still wish to remove U.S. forces from the peninsula? How will he go about achieving those objectives? That is truly a challenge as we think about it. And what is the road and what has kept peace and stability on the peninsula? And why should we change a formula that has worked in the past? We truly live in a very complex global environment. The global environment is more volatile now, and we would hope that it would be peaceful, but it's very volatile everywhere around the world. The Middle East, Europe, tremendous threat from North Korea. So there are new ones and challenges that have emerged and do place significant threats on any alliance. We always hear about China's influence around the globe, their proliferation in technology, the potential for crisis in Taiwan. A flashpoint in the region, in the Pacific. We look at the new coalition, and we don't read much about it, but there is a new coalition: North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran. We should be wary of the intent to destabilize peace in the region and on the Republic of Korea. We don't read much, and someone said it this morning, and I really appreciate that. We ignore the tremendous human rights violations in North Korea, within the gulags, with thousands who have no hope. We don't talk much about that, but it is a challenge as we think about North Korea. North Korea's continued missile and nuclear capabilities, which through Kim Jong-un has not only increased in capability, but in quantity. And oh, by the way, as much as we would hope, he has never had an inclination to denuclearize. We should ask ourselves, all of us, as an alliance, who is responsible for allowing this capability to flourish since the Kim Jong-il regime? What were the strategies that were at fault to allow a nuclear-capable North Korea that now not only can cause devastation on the peninsula, but external to the peninsula and globally with ICBMs? The Kim Jong-un regime, in my view, is a crime family. They continue counterfeiting, exporting drugs, transfer prohibited equipment to other countries, and stimulate terrorism. They continue to provocate South Korea. They haven't stopped. They just have. They do it on what I call a sine curve. We see North Korea now as the main ammunition war supply chain to Russia in the Ukrainian war. Thousands and thousands of containers of ammunition from North Korea. Also, for the first time in great quantities, I should say, about 14,000 North Korean troops fighting and dying in the Ukraine. We don't know what the casualties are. You'll never read about the casualties, but you don't read much about it. We're not getting much. We don't understand what North Korea is getting in return from Russia for sending in these troops. So So there are some of the challenges that we face and that we think about as we think about this alliance. They're contemporary challenges, but hope is not a method to solve challenges. We have to have a methodology and a strategy that transcends time. So what are some of the requirements that I think, personally, must be resolved? We hear that the Indo-Pacific region for the United States is perceived as a strategic regional focus, which of course includes our alliance. So when we think about that, there are several things that the United States and South Korea must talk about and agree upon. They must decide where they fall, where South Korea falls with the United States strategies in multilateral engagement. Another topic which we read about every day, and it's a transactional topic, which should not be very important to a strategic alliance, and that is the Special Measures Agreement and burden sharing, and the political pressures associated with that. And it should not be decided in the press. It should be decided between two countries that are in an alliance that are going forward for a common goal, peace and stability. Once again, the long-standing discussion, which was a discussion when I was the Commander-in-Chief in Korea, of operational control transfer. Understanding the consequences of that are very important. I don't think many people understand. We must fill some interoperability gaps that we have, which we're doing every day through technological agreements, and primarily in cyberspace and AI. That's very important that we work together. Both countries are technologically inventive and innovative, and we should share and be interoperable. And the last one, which is a comment that you read all the time in the Korean press primarily. Does the U.S. nuclear umbrella mean anything, or should we develop our own nuclear weapons? These are requirements that must be discussed and resolved as we look to the future of the ROK-US alliance. So there are some of the alliance requirements as I see them. Now, what are the imperatives? I think there are imperatives associated with our alliance. Deterrence is and has been achieved by trained and ready forces that are strong and capable with the will to fight, and we should not lose that aspect. Deterrence, because the adversary understands strength. They do not understand weakness. So the ROK and the U.S. forces, and as we see now, some UN capability coming into the Republic of Korea to join, must be trained and ready. We must continue our readiness exercises, including all elements of political, military, joint, combined, and multilateral efforts. Because the saying is just not a bumper sticker of being ready to fight tonight. We don't have a vote when we will fight. We will fight when the need arises. We must increase cooperation with Japan. And we've read about that recently, that President Lee has increased discussions with Japan. They are critical in many aspects that many people don't understand. They play a key role in the United Nations command. We have to have strong trade partnerships, which I know are being worked right now. And I think we come to a mutually agreed to solution. Again, not being a trade person, not being a politician, but being someone who knows that the alliance can essentially solve any problems if they put their mind to it. And we must ensure the viability of Combined Forces Command. We don't talk about that. My main job was not USFK. My main job was not the commander of the United Nations Command. My main job was the warfighting commander of the Combined Forces Command, which is a ROC U.S. command that works for both presidents, President of the Republic of Korea and the President of the United States, in deterring and defending the Republic of Korea. It is a warfighting headquarters with a 4-star U.S. commander. And when you think about it, it is the only warfighting headquarters which is country-focused with a 4-star commander. So what are the consequences? Another imperative, we must communicate the alliance benefits to leadership of both nations. National Assembly, Congress of the United States, people of the United States, people of the Republic of Korea. Because one of the challenges that I see in the future are among the Korean population and their desire to continue to have U.S. forces present in the Republic. And we must adapt to a changing strategic environment. And that's external to the peninsula. Because the strategic environment is changing significantly. We see that every day. So, lastly, let me quote General Brunson, who is now the commander of Combined Forces Command in the Republic of Korea. His testimony to the U.S. Congress. And he said, I quote, "The fellowship born out of the Korean War must be refreshed and revitalized should they be called upon again. Ultimately, our alliance with the Republic of Korea and multinational partnerships will play a critical role in our efforts to maintain stability and prevent escalation of these tensions toward a global crisis." So this, I believe, is our charge as those of us who are very interested, who love the Republic of Korea, who want to see peace and stability on the Republic of Korea, who want to see peace and stability in the region. This is our charge given to us by General Brunson. What he is saying indirectly is hope is not a strategy. Hard work, determination is the strategy. So that's our charge for the future of the alliance. I will tell you, it's been an honor to be here. God bless you all here today. God bless the Republic of Korea, our alliance. Kachi Kapshi Da.
Thank you very much for this speech on the U.S. and Mark Alliance. For our next keynote speech, we are honored to welcome Mr. Clifton Truman Daniel, the grandson of President Truman. We'll also watch a short video about him and his grandfather, President Truman, whose swift decision during the Korean War helped save the Republic of Korea. Thank you.
Those are all good pictures. I want to start by saying this morning, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Consul General, and thank you, General, for your remarks and for breaking the ceiling on using English this morning. I want to start by saying that I think it's significant and inspiring and frankly effective that the people taking the lead in this peace forum are the victims of Nogunri. Despite what they have suffered, they are the ones making amends, looking toward the future. And if I may draw a comparison between Nogunri and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I've worked with survivors of those bombings. All they ever asked of me, and of anybody else, was to tell those stories in the hope that we never do that to each other again. The same is true here, tell those stories, because if we don't tell those stories, if we don't have the whole truth, as my grandfather said, there's nothing new in the world but the history you don't know. If we don't have the truth and we don't have all the details, we are in danger of repeating ourselves. So congratulations to them for taking the lead in this. My grandfather did not hesitate to come to the aid of the Republic of Korea. I've heard recently that it took him less than 10 seconds after he got the phone call at home in Independence on what for us was June 24th, 1950, that the North had invaded the South. He said later that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. I believe that we must assist free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way. The seeds of totalitarian regimes are nurtured by misery and want. The spread and grow of the evil in the evil soil of poverty and strife. They reach their full growth when the hope of a people for a better life has died. We must keep that hope alive. Pretty much from the second that he got off the phone with Secretary Atchison, who called him on the 24th to let him know that the North invaded the South, my mother said that my grandfather started worrying about the possibility that the North's invasion of the South could herald the beginning of World War III. His goal in Asia and in Europe was to draw a line in the sand against communism, and to do so in a way that would prevent a third world war. Americans did not understand what came to be called a police action. They were tired. The world was tired after 4 years, many more years for many, 4 years of World War II. So while applauding my grandfather's decision to aid South Korea, they quickly decided that the goal was murky and that the cost was too high. You start a useless, blundering war that you may dictate in Korea instead of Stalin, a distraught father wrote to my grandfather in 1951, and then drag it out so that our munitions makers make millions and the poor lose their sons. Ironically, many Americans favored escalation, including the possible use of nuclear weapons, as a means to win a quick and decisive victory. One of the most vocal proponents of escalation was my grandfather's commander in the field, General Douglas MacArthur. Though lauded for the brilliant landing at Incheon in September of 1950, by 1951, with the Chinese in the war, he was publicly contravening U.S. policy. In the 1951 book, The General and the President and the Future of American Foreign Policy, historians Richard Rovere and Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. wrote that the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Omar Bradley, believed that escalation would have involved us in the wrong war, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, against the wrong enemy. Firing the general in 1951 was one of my grandfather's most unpopular decisions. Members of the Joint Committee on Armed Services and Foreign Relations of the United States Senate, who conducted an inquiry in the spring of 1951 into that dismissal and the military situation in the Far East, acknowledged that although my grandfather had been within the constitutional power of the president, the circumstances were a shock to the national pride, and the reasons assigned for the removal of General MacArthur were utterly inadequate to justify the act. Much of the public was against my grandfather for the war as well. He had one letter: Dear Harry S. Truman, as a personal matter, I think you were a pretty big dope to fire MacArthur. I think you are a three-letter word for a donkey. Quite a few kids that I know do not like you, and I don't blame them. Also, me, myself, I don't like you either. MacArthur may have not been following instructions, but he was doing his duty to his country. We have already lost the war. You are just a big expletive deleted, that he wrote XXOOOO, and every dumb thing I can think of. He was a 5-star general, boob. Not yours truly, Dutch Fitzgerald. And it says, P.S. I'm only 12 and a half years old, but I mean it. George Elsey, one of my grandfather's advisors, wrote that the Korean conflict overshadowed all else for the rest of my grandfather's presidency and brought his public approval rating to the lowest, I think, that we've ever had it. I think George W. Bush might have beat him for a little while, but Grandpa, I think, still had the lowest approval rating leading office of any U.S. president. But on the day the armistice was signed in 1953, he got a letter from Merritt Metzger of Alveda, Ohio, described himself as an ordinary, common, everyday farmer. All three sons had served in the military, one of them in World War II. He'd listened to the radio broadcast of the armistice and thought that Eisenhower and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles had taken just a little too much credit for the end of the war. So he wrote to my grandfather, "I know history will tell the story, and the truth is bound to be known in years to come. I believe you did what any honest, God-fearing person would have done." That same year, and I don't know the date, my grandfather received a letter from William Banning of New Haven, Connecticut. It was short, and it was written entirely in block letters. "Mr. Truman, since you have been directly responsible for the loss of our son's life in Korea, you might just as well keep this emblem on display in your trophy room as a memory of one of your historic deeds. Our major regret at this time is that your daughter was not there to receive the same treatment as our son received in Korea." Private First Class George Banning was killed May 11, 1953 in the vicinity of Sagamak, North Korea, near the 38th parallel, just a week shy of his 22nd birthday. In that letter to my grandfather, his father enclosed his son's Purple Heart, which was awarded to soldiers wounded in battle and posthumously to the families of those killed. That letter and that medal are on display at the Truman Library, and there are copies of that letter and a Purple Heart on display in Korea at the War Memorial Museum. My grandfather died December 26, 1972, and the archivist going through his desk and his possessions in his working office found that letter and that medal in the filing cabinet right at my grandfather's left elbow. He kept it close by for the rest of his life to remind him what it costs to send young men, young women into battle, even if you are on the right side. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a History and Social Studies Teachers Conference hosted by a Dr. Jung-Woo Han of Syracuse University. He is the creator of the Korean War Veterans Digital Memorial and the Korean War Digital History Project. And he collected more than 350 interviews of Korean War veterans. The veterans present at the conference were proud to have fought in the Korean War in defense of the Korean people, and a shared conviction that free is the only way for people to live. During the conference, those veterans honored their fellow soldiers who had given their lives. It was a simple ceremony, and it reminded me of a simple speech given by a president of our country that we consider one of our greatest. My grandfather certainly did, Abraham Lincoln. He gave that speech at Gettysburg after the Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War. Preceding him on the stage was a politician, pastor, an educator, diplomat, and orator, Edward Everett, who spoke for 2 hours. Lincoln spoke for just over 2 minutes. But as my grandfather said, nobody knows that Edward Everett was on that platform, but everybody knows that Lincoln was there. And what Lincoln did, he had come, he said, to dedicate a portion of the battlefield as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that our nation might live. He said, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they fought to here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. The South Korean, American, and United Nations troops who fought and died did not die in vain. And I have every confidence that the world will not forget them, and that the Republic of Korea will continue to dedicate itself to the unfinished work which they who fought here and have thus far so nobly advanced. Thank you.
very much, Mr. Clifton Daniel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure there have been lots of insights you gained from the keynote speeches. I'll provide you a short 5-minute break to process those insights. After taking 5 minutes break, we'll come back with an academic forum. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm honored today to join you as the moderator and Korean scholar dedicated to exploring how our countries can shape our ongoing relations, engagement, and for many of us, the education of young people. Thank you for the teachers who joined us today. 대단히 반갑습니다. Session 1 is titled Lessons and Reevaluation of the Yangon Battle, a watershed moment in the Korean War. It will be presented by retired ROK Brigadier General Park Jong-lam and former General of the Veterans Affairs and an expert in the Battle of Yeongdong. General Park, can you join us, please? And let's give us him a nice warm round of applause.
Honorable General Zelle and distinguished guests, it is a great honor for me to meet you here and to present to you about the Battle of Yeongdong. First of all, I'd like to pay my deepest respect to the participating nations and veterans who saved the Republic of Korea from crisis under the banner of the United Nations 75 years ago. This is my brief career. Today, I'd like to briefly explain the Battle of Yeongdong, which was the only battle of the Korean War that has remained relatively unknown until now, but could be considered the watershed in the Korean War, focusing on the military aspect. Due to time constraints, my presentation will be brief and take about 20 minutes. For more detailed information, please refer to the event brochure. I will walk you through the following points as you see. First, background of the Battle of Yeongdong. On 25th June 1950, war broke out on the Korean Peninsula due to the illegal invasion by North Korean Communist forces. In response, the United Nations promptly convened a Security Council meeting and adopted 3 resolutions in succession. As a result, the United States entered the war. The Navy and Air Force joined on 27th June, and the ground forces followed on 1st July, after General MacArthur inspected the front line near the Han River on 29th June. In the early stage of the Korean War, the initial ground war was a series of clashes between the well-equipped and highly trained North Korean People's Army, KPA, unprepared American troops, and South Korean troops who had lost much of their combat capability. The 24th Infantry Division, which was the first to be deployed to the ground war on July 5th due to its proximity to Korea, also lost much of its combat power and retreated due to its inferior manpower and weapons, failing to stop the KPA's advancing from Osan to Daejeon. The US troops were initially unaware of KPA's tactics and strategies. Okay. We now take a brief look at the North Korean KPA's strategy and tactics. as revealed in the early stage of the war. The campaign aimed for a quick and decisive occupation of the South by leveraging its superiority in mobility, firepower, and manpower. Their tactics included bypass infiltration to execute encirclement and night raids, as well as brutal and inhumane methods such as forcing refugees to walk through minefields to clear paths. Now I will explain the beginning of progress of the Battle of Yeongdo. In order to block the rapid advance of the KPA and establish Nakdong River defense line to Busan perimeter, General Walker, the commander of the UN ground forces, issued the order to block the enemy at Yeongdo, a strategic point leading to Daegu, the provisional capital of Korea. He instructed, protect Yeongdo. Remember, there are no friendly troops behind you. You must keep your own back door open. You can live without food, but you cannot last long without ammunition. And unless the Yeongdong-Daegu road is kept open, you will soon be without ammunition. In response to this directive, the 1st Cavalry Division relieved the 24th Infantry Division in Yeongdong, and the 25th Infantry Division swiftly moved from Andong to occupy the Hwanggan and Sangnyong areas. Following these deployments, the 1st Cavalry Division and the 25th Infantry Division began engaging with the KPA forces. Let's look at the progress of the Battle of Yeongdong through these maps. Left map shows the rapid advance of North Korean forces from June onward. The map on the right zooms in on the area where the Battle of Yeongdong took place in late July. At the time, the 1st Cavalry Division was deployed along the Daejeon-Yeongdong axis. Next one. Meanwhile, the 25th Infantry Division moved 108 kilometers from Andong in a single day and took up defensive position along the Sangnyong-Hwanggan area. Both divisions were positioned around the strategic hub of Yeongdong. By critical time for the UN forces to establish the Nakdong defense line, laying the groundwork for a future shift in the tide of war. A brief summary of the Battle of Yeongdong from July 22nd to 29th, 1950 is as follows. The 1st Cavalry Division took over the defense mission along the Daejeon-Yeongdong axis from the 24th Infantry Division and primarily engaged the North Korean 3rd Division in the Yeongdong area. Meanwhile, the 25th Infantry Division was assigned to defend the Sangju-Hwanggan axis on the eastern flank of the 1st Cavalry Division, where it faced the North Korean 2nd Division. Despite having inferior troop numbers, equipment, and insufficient preparation, the US forces managed to hold back the enemy's advance for more than 8 days, thanks to the strong will of their commanders and effective ground their joint operations. At the time, most American soldiers were young men between the ages of 17 and 22, many of whom had received little or no combat training. Even military band members were sent into battle. Here, I'd like to share the story of the late Private Leonard. He was killed in action during the Battle of Yeongdong and was listed as missing in action, as his remains could not be recovered at the time. In 2017, 8 years ago, the remains were finally discovered in Yeongdong, and he was at last able to return to his hometown. This is a press release from DPAA showing Private Leonard's remains being recovered, identified, and returned home. Here, let's pause the moment and read a poem written in his memory by one of his comrades from the 8th Cavalry Regiment. This poem gives us a glimpse into the situation the unit faced during the Battle of Yeongdong. The slide on the right it shows the recently identified soldiers aged 18 to 22 from the 5th Cavalry Regiment who lost 275 men in the Battle of Yeongdong. You all know about Father Eli Capon. Father Capon was a chaplain in the 3rd Battalion, 8th Cavalry Regiment, and participated in the Battle of Yeongdong. Father Capon, who earned the nickname of Christ of the Battlefield, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor and the 10th Military Merit Medal, the highest decoration in the Republic of Korea. The photo below shows scenes from the Battle of Yeongdong and the US soldiers who fought there. They made noble sacrifices to stop the KPA's advance toward Daegu, which was serving as the provisional capital of Korea at the time. Looking at the casualties during the Battle of Yeongdong, there are 907 US soldiers killed or wounded, approximately 5,000 North Korean casualties, and around 400 civilian casualties. The civilian casualties, mostly local residents and refugees, occurred on 26 July 1950 near the railroad bridge by the Nogunli. The causes of the incident can be summarized as follows. First, refugee control and communication were not properly implemented. Second, the battlefield situation made it extremely difficult to distinguish between enemy and friendly forces. Third, the US troops deployed to the front responded in a misjudged and distorted way to the KPA's brutal tactics of using refugees to infiltrate positions. In addition, the battlefield psychology of young soldiers, most of whom were between the ages of 17 and 22, and had been sent into an unfamiliar and chaotic combat environment with little training, may have also contributed to the incident. Here are the lessons and significance of the Battle of Yeongdong. The first lesson we can draw from the Battle of Yeongdong is the importance of commander's determination. The second lesson is the effectiveness of combined and joint operations. The third lesson is the importance of understanding about the battlefield. Finally, we must raise the fundamental question: how can basic human rights be protected on the battlefield? In particular, we must reflect on the importance of effective measures for refugees management and rapid separation of refugees from active combat zone. The significance of Battle of Yeongdong. The Yeongdong battle was a pivotal moment in the Korean War. By delaying the KPA's advance for 8 days, the battle gave UN forces the critical window they need to reinforce their strengths and establish the Nakdong River defense line. It also disrupted the KPA's original strategy of quickly occupying Daegu and bringing the entire Korean peninsula under communist control. And the Yeongdong battle became an opportunity to draw attention to the preciousness of life and the value of human rights through the Nogunli incident, and it also became an opportunity for the bereaved families of the Nogunli victims and the Korean government to take the lead in excavating the remains of missing American soldiers. Sadly, however, the Battle of Yeongdong is undervalued, and the noble sacrifice of American soldiers is not well known. And also, there is a lack of records, data, statistics, and joint research between Korea and the US. Now, I'd like to mention the testimony, proud achievement, and regrets that remind us of the meaning of the Battle of Yeongdong. This is the testimony of a student soldier. When the Battle of Yeongdong broke out, a 16-year-old middle school student volunteered to support the 8th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division by delivering supplies. The following is his testimony. The U.S. 1st Cavalry Division dug trenches in Yeongdong between 22nd and 25th July and fought against the infiltrating North Korean 3rd Division. Every time I come here, I think of the U.S. soldiers who fought beside me. How could I forget the comrades who died in a foreign land to protect freedom? During the Battle of Yeongdong, over 900 U.S. ground troops made noble sacrifices to delay the enemy's advance. In particular, the 27th Regiment of the 25th Infantry Division was the first unit to receive the U.S. Presidential Unit Citation for its outstanding performance. The achievement of the 1st Cavalry Division were also honored internationally as its unit crossing the 38th parallel during the counteroffensive was featured on an old 500-piece Philippine bayonet. And yes, sadly, the remains of the 33 soldiers killed in action are still buried somewhere in Yeongdong. And while there are monuments commemorating the early battles of the U.S. ground forces before Yeongdong battle, there are still no monuments or memorials in Yeongdong honoring the sacrifices of these U.S. ground forces. Why is that? Now, it's time for us to clearly define and remember the contributions that shape this history. Now, to conclude this presentation, I'd like to share a message that captures the enduring meaning of the Battle of Yeongdong. The Battle of Yeongdong should be remembered as a pivotal engagement that significantly contributed to protecting the safety, freedom, and peace of the Republic of Korea, a nation once unfamiliar to them and the Korean, a people they had never known, against the threat of communist forces. Once again, paying tribute to the young soldiers who fought in the Battle of Yeongdong, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. To respond to the session, we welcome our panelists, Dr. Greg Brzezinski, Professor of History and International Affairs at George Washington University, Mr. Greg Alquist, Educator and Curriculum Director of the Korean War Legacy Foundation, and Mr. Matthew Bonliwi, Grammy-nominated songwriter, producer, and author. Should time permit, questions can come toward the end of the session, but we encourage you to express your thoughts and thanks during our lunch and breaks. And in the interest of time, which I'm going to try to keep, I recommend all presenters and panelists today please help us as we try to shave 1 or 2 minutes off of each session so that we can kind of keep our timeline going and on time. Thank you very much for your support in this. In session, let me pass the mics over and then I'll let you all decide how you want to begin. I think so, because I think we have enough time. We have 30, 20, 30 minutes. The remainder, whatever comments. I think it's
Okay, thank you. It's a great honor to be here and great to see everybody. It's an honor to be commenting on the Brigadier General's speech and also a little bit intimidating since he was a participant in the Korean War and I was not. But thank you very much for your service, and I'll try to give my comments as a historian, and I can only really use a historian's tools to try to give you any feedback. But I think the Battle of Yeongdong, as you've pointed out, has long been overshadowed in histories of the Korean War. It doesn't receive as much attention in histories as the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter. It wasn't a sort of drastic and unexpected victory like the Battle of Incheon. It wasn't a sort of hard-earned victory like Operation Killer or the Battle of Seoul. And it hasn't had the benefit of movies being made about it, like Heartbreak Ridge or Pork Chop Hill. I think, as the presenter noted, the image of the battle has been marred in certain ways by its association with the Nogunri incident, in part because the incident occurred in the immediate aftermath of the battle and involved the same division. It's also been marred by some racism controversies surrounding the 24th Infantry, an all-black unit which was sent into a very difficult situation, but subsequently criticized for failing to hold the line. This was a very important issue at the time because President Truman, and actually one of the great things and most important things that he did during his presidency is, after World War II, he officially desegregated the military. But some officers had actually continued to resist the integration because they claimed it would hurt discipline and morale. Officers and officials on both sides of the debate used the performance of the 24th Infantry as evidence. In his presentation, General Park makes, I believe, a very compelling case for the need for historians to reevaluate the battle, seeing it not only in light of its aftermath or the controversies that it created, but also in light of its importance and larger contributions to the war in general. I think that General Park is right, that we should try to see the battle and separate it from the tragic events of Nogunri that followed it. Truman had, at the time, been caught off guard by North Korea's rapid and initially successful invasion of South Korea, and the troops that arrived in Korea didn't really know a lot about what to expect and what the terrain was. These forces had mostly been deployed from Japan, where they were part of the US occupying force. And so many of them had been primed and trained for their roles as occupiers and assisting in the administration of Japan, and they weren't as prepared for the harsh combat conditions that existed in Korea. Despite this fact, they created an interval that enabled the United States to establish the Busan perimeter and hold out until the Incheon landing. We do need to view the battle, as I think General Park tries to, from a perspective that also allows us to have empathy for the people who fought in it and appreciate what was accomplished at a very, very difficult time in the war. If I had anything to sort of add here, or a sort of different perspective, I would say that the presentation looks at the battle a lot from the view of the United States, and to a lesser degree from the point of view of South Korea. But it doesn't pay as much attention to the North Korean perspective. And I'm not saying that that means North Korea was good, or that they were fighting for a just cause. But I think it's, as a historian, I sort of like to view events as they were seen by all of the different actors involved. So I think it's also interesting to look at how the communist side has seen the battle. And the reason, again, to do this is not to defend North Korea or justify its actions. I think archival documents make it very clear that the Korean War began because Kim Il-sung plotted with Stalin to destroy South Korea and carry out an invasion of the country. But it is important to understand how the events can be seen differently by different actors, at times. So I think the general's presentation argued that even though American forces had to retreat, the battle, in a way, ultimately represented a victory for the United States, in that it contributed to the safeguarding of the freedom of the Republic of Korea. But what's interesting is that North Korea and China also see the battle as a victory, and as part of a heroic campaign to reunify a country that, from their point of view, had been unjustly divided by the great powers, and defeat a government that, in their perspective, would not have existed without American intervention. They view the fact that they were able to drive American forces out of Yeongdong as a significant accomplishment of the KPR forces. It's certainly true that American forces that were sent into the battle were not very well prepared, or as prepared as would have been ideal. But at the same time, North Koreans took pride in the fact that they were able to drive out the forces of the United States which represented the greatest military power in the world at the time, and North Korea had only existed as a nation or as a state for 2 years. At the time, North Korean reports praised the performance of KPA troops in Yeongdong and boasted that by pushing American forces out, they had forced it to withdraw from strongholds where it had originally intended to establish a defensive line. It had thereby forced the United States to modify its plans and thrown the so-called imperialist forces, as it called them, into confusion. It also made the Korean People's Army more optimistic about the war in general, which turned out to be false optimism or ill-founded optimism, because Americans had apparently been forced to abandon a great deal of equipment and supplies at Yeongdong as well. They captured some of the first American prisoners of war during this battle. And so the presentation briefly also mentioned guerrillas and partisans, South Koreans who sympathized with socialism and aided the Korean People's Army. This too is something that's remained very controversial in South Korea, but was a source of pride for North Korea at the time because they thought it was evidence that they were supported by the local population, even though I think the reality that historians have discovered in the aftermath of this was much more complex. While Americans viewed themselves as protecting a democratic government, the North Koreans viewed themselves as rescuing it from a despotic one. And again, I'm not saying that their viewpoint was right. I'm just saying that this is how they saw it, and that this is important as well if you want to understand the war and view the history as it was seen by some of the different sides. I think one of the things that's interesting is that the way that General Park describes the Battle of Yeongdong is actually very much akin to the way that North Korea represents the Battle of Incheon. Much as American forces eventually retreated from Yeongdong, North Koreans were of course eventually forced to retreat from Incheon. Yet North Koreans have depicted that battle as a heroic moment that enabled them to eventually escape and regroup. You can watch this in, there's a North Korean film, Wolmido, about this, which I think you can catch on YouTube and see sort of this North Korean perspective. And it sort of shows the North Korean military patiently waiting for American troops to arrive. And I just think this is interesting in that there's some parallels we can draw if you want to see the Korean War as a war that was also a very tragic one, and one that was caused by national division and never resolved. And I think we should ultimately remember that it is possible for both sides to have competing victory narratives and see the same battle as a victory, because the conclusion of the war itself was ambiguous in some ways, and neither side got completely what it wanted. The United States succeeded in protecting the South Korean state and laying the groundwork for it to develop into the prosperous democracy that it has become today, but it failed in rolling back communism and destroying North Korea. Kim Il-sung similarly failed to reunify Korea, but when the war ended, he remained in power in North Korea and would remain so for another 45 years. Ultimately, how the Battle of Yeongdong should be seen may continue to depend in part on perspective, but I think that this presentation by the Brigadier General did an excellent job in making it very clear that we should view this battle not only in the light of tragedies and controversies that surrounded it, but we also need to look at it as a battle that helped South Korea to survive and eventually to thrive and to prosper. So I'll end there.
So what I want to share is a few comments and reflections on this battle, and the General's comments. I deeply appreciated them. But I want to share, I'm a 10th grade social studies teacher in New York, and also serve as the curriculum director for the Korean War Legacy Foundation. And so my perspective kind of comes from that educator's angle. And I want to begin by kind of admitting that your comments were an opportunity for me to understand the context of Nogunri with greater clarity, and situated my understanding of the Korean War, but also, honestly, of the Cold War in general, which I hope ultimately is going to impact my students, the ones that I teach, and who might one day engage with some other educational resources that our foundation might also produce. I think the Battle of Yeongdeung, while perhaps not widely as known as other engagements in the Korean War, is important and maybe even overlooked part of American history education. It brings clarity to the desperate early days of the Korean War and the immense pressure on the newly found and newly formed United Nations and the early actions by that international organization. The UN's involvement in Korea was not a typical peacekeeping mission. Characterized by lightly armed observers monitoring a truce, this was peace enforcement under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, a direct military intervention sanctioned by the Security Council to repel an act of aggression. And as we know, largely American forces initially engaged in the Korean War, and they were not prepared for those early stages. They lacked resources, numbers, and even context to immediately halt the well-equipped and determined North Korean army, which was sweeping south. And Yeongdeung was a pivotal and costly fighting retreat, a reality that points to the fact that peace enforcement often means direct fighting and a loss of life, a picture far removed, at least for students often, from the blue helmets monitoring a ceasefire. And this is an important point, I think, for American students to understand. It highlights the very real human cost and the very real challenges when the international community decides to use force to uphold peace, and to use military force in a hot zone, though maybe technically a Cold War. But perhaps profoundly from the American education perspective, the context of Yeongdeung is inextricably linked to the tragic events at Nogunri. The same desperate circumstances, the pressure of an advancing army, the threat of encirclement, the breakdown of communication, and a real fear of North Korean infiltration among the refugees that were pointed out during the presentation, that created an environment where the unimaginable could actually occur. And this incident reveals the horrific and often unforeseen consequences when lines between combatants and non-combatants become dangerously blurred in the context of war. For students in the United States, understanding this connection is vital. It forces all of us in education to confront the moral and ethical dilemmas that are inherent in war, even when fought under the banner of collective security, noble intentions, and heroically brave actions. Studying the Korean War, or any war, is not only about military strategy and victories, but also about the very real impact of conflict on all involved: soldiers, civilians, families, communities, and even nations. And I think it reveals the multifaceted costs on those fighting and sometimes the devastating consequences for innocent people. Nogunri serves as a clear, uncomfortable reminder that during wars fought for the right reasons and even result in celebrated and good outcomes, that atrocities can occur, that human rights must be protected at all times and in all circumstances, and that accountability for actions, however difficult, should be front and center for historical integrity and a future of peace. As a high school teacher, I find that teaching this particular period, especially the early Korean War, and incidents like Yeongdeung and Nogunri, is an essential part of understanding the Cold War. It moves beyond the abstract ideological struggle between communism and democracy and the rivalry of two international superpowers, which often in our kind of teaching is what this kind of devolves into. And it grounds the conflict in very real human experiences. This history provides a crucial lens to analyze the ethical questions that inevitably arise in armed conflict, and furthermore bring into sharp relief the tensions between military necessity and humanitarian concerns, the challenges of distinguishing friend from foe, and the moral burdens placed upon individuals in combat. It's a sobering yet powerful way for students to learn that history is not simply a recital of dates and battles, but rather a complicated web of human choices, consequences, and ethical responsibilities. As pointed out in the presentation, it is interesting to note that there's no monument or memorial specifically honoring and remembering the sacrifices of the U.S. soldiers who fought and died in Yeongdong County. The absence highlights an often overlooked part of history education in the United States: the power of remembering and the importance of memorials and monuments. Memorials are not merely stones and beautiful structures inscribed with names. They are tangible connections to the past, serving as powerful teaching tools for the community that shape our collective memory, that honor sacrifice, and invite reflection. Their absence can contribute to historical forgetting, diminishing acts of bravery, or turning a blind eye to the real cost of war. And teaching students about this gap in remembering can prompt discussion and analysis of whose stories are told and whose stories are underemphasized, how history is preserved or perhaps neglected, and why it matters to acknowledge all of our history, even the most challenging and uncomfortable moments. So I think learning about Yeongdong and Nogunri together offers a more complete, though perhaps uncomfortable, truth about the Korean War. We're asked to, and even invited to, reflect on the soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice for a country and people they did not know, but also had to navigate the responsibilities of life and death in the context of a war. As students and teachers of history, we can more critically analyze the historical narratives that are handed to us, especially those of our own countries, so that we also wrestle with the hard truths of our past, as well as what is not included. And finally, we see how modern, relevant, and critically important these issues are today, or how fragile our international humanitarian law can be, and how it is too often under duress, and how we must protect the most vulnerable who live in areas of conflict. The events of the past should sharpen our sensitivity to those in our world today. So by studying these events, we gain a deeper appreciation for the sacrifice and cost of war, and the responsibility that comes with military action. It is a difficult but necessary lesson that can lead to greater outcomes in learning history. I think the reason that I and many of my colleagues and history teachers in this room actually became educators, and that is to grow and cultivate empathy, historical empathy, and a critical thinking and a civic commitment to justice and peace. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but I'm learning quite a bit this morning. I'm sure you as educators, this is an educational table over here, my friend. Yeah. I'm guessing you still learn as well, even though you teach, and how important is that? It's so great. My name is Matt Ronley. I'm a farm kid from Kansas who grew up to eventually become a music producer and a film producer. Why am I here? I'm here because of family. My wife's great uncle founded a nonprofit called Compassion International. It was founded by Everett Swanson. He was a preacher from Chicago. He went to Korea. He was speaking to the troops there, and he encountered orphans in the street, kids that were orphaned by the war. We now know that there were so many of these poor, desperate children that needed help. He came back to America and began what became Compassion International. Now it's a $1 billion organization helping over 2 million kids a year globally. But back then, it was the few kids that he saw in front of him. His story is something that my friend Eric Wilson and I told in a book, and so we've gotten to know more about him and his life. But like I said, it's a family story, and that story ultimately carried us both to Korea, where we had the opportunity to go to Nogunri. And I think what I was struck by this morning, listening to everything, was the importance of family. I think many of us in this room could probably think of the reasons that we're here, and it would probably have some connection to family. I was struck by a family story by a grandson, and just the importance of that. I was struck by the story of a chairman. He's walking in now, but he's like, first and foremost, a son. His impact was not just reading dates in a book or anything like that. It was actual family. It was the turmoil that his family went to that birthed this lifelong passion for what he's doing now. Another family story for me was, I was looking and realizing, I almost had tears in my eyes as I was looking at this and realizing that a year ago in October, I was standing right there. And I wasn't alone. I was with Eric, and I was also with two of my kids, Grace and Cole. I think they were aged like 20 and 23. And I was thinking about, just from an educational standpoint, you know, my kids were moved to tears. My daughter especially, she was wrecked by what she learned about. Standing there, seeing the bullet holes, hearing the stories and understanding that, and kind of as was mentioned before, that's the human family part of this, right? And it's like, you as educators, I know, have a profound opportunity to be able to share those family stories, because that's ultimately what's impacting each one of us here today. I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I think it's a miracle that we're all in the same room together when you think about the shared history we have. And I'm excited to be able to carry these important stories about the Battle of Yeongdong and Nogunri forward to our own families, and then to everybody else that we can encounter and share the news with. Thanks.
Give them a round of applause, please. And if we can bring in session 2 presenters and panelists, please. Session 2 is titled Lessons from Nogunli Incident, Restoring the Honor of Korean War Victims Through Public History, Moral Injury, and Restorative Justice. Our presenters are Dr. Hope Elizabeth May, professor of philosophy at Central Michigan University and a leading scholar of peace and international law, and Dr. Chung Budo, chairman of the Nogunli International Peace Foundation. Our commentators, you're welcome to join us on stage. Dr. Won Baek, Emeritus Professor at Central Michigan University, Dr. Roy Tamashiro, Professor Emeritus, Department of Multidisciplinary Studies at Webster University, and Chair of the International Network of Museums for Peace, Conference Program Committee, and Mr. Randall Olson, Treasurer of the Cora de Breza Foundation Analyst within the State Operations Division of the Michigan Department of the Attorney General. Let's give them a nice warm welcome.
Can you hear me now? Okay, very good. Good morning. I know we're running late. I am Hope Elizabeth May. I'm with, actually, the three of us come from Michigan. And I am an educator, and I want to thank all of the educators here. I teach at Central Michigan University, where Dr. Pak also teaches. Political science, philosophy, but then later in life I went to law school and I learned about international law. And Dr. Chung is not here right now, so let me explain how I met Dr. Chung. because we've been talking about history, and it's been said today that by Counsel General Yi, I think he's left, but he said history can be looked at as the history of war. History is war, not only. There's also something called peace history or positive history, which is what I focus on, and that's how I met Dr. Chung. I met Dr. Chung in 2013 in The Hague, the Netherlands. The Hague markets itself as the international capital of peace and justice. Why is that? Because in 1899, well before World War I, there was something called the Hague Peace Conference. And at the Hague Peace Conference, there were a number of treaties and so forth. You may have heard of the Hague Conventions. You may have heard of the Geneva Conventions. Humanitarian law was mentioned. There's what's called a normative framework, a framework of principles, values, etc. And we really start building it in 1899. So this is where I meet Dr. Chung in 2013. Why are we there? Why am I in The Hague in 2013? Why is Dr. Chung in The Hague in 2013? Because of an anniversary. Not of a war, but of something called the Peace Palace. Has anybody heard of it? Okay, one person, my student. Oh wait, thank you very much, the Peace Palace. Okay, sorry. So 4 people. Can you raise your hands again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and okay, very good. So the Peace Palace was built by Andrew Carnegie, an American. Who knew? It's on a street called Carnegie Plein. Who knew? And it celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2013. Those of us working in what's called the peace movement, or the peace through law movement, or the peace through education movement, or the history of values, or what have you, we can have all of these different labels, we're there in The Hague. And I met Dr. Chung at the unveiling of a statue. We've been talking about memorials, monuments, the importance of tangible items. The Purple Heart Medal, a tangible item so that your great-grandfather remembers the cost of war on individual families. I would be remiss if I didn't draw attention to the missing man table there. The missing man table comes out of the Vietnam War. The POW flag, created by Mary Hoff, a wife whose husband was shot down over North Vietnam. Is he dead? Is he alive? I don't know. But at the time, without a death certificate, the household could not be run by women. So actually, women aren't involved very much so in the creation of the flag and what I call the duty to remember through objects, flags, pins, buildings, memorials. That's why we're here. That's where I met Dr. Chung at the Peace Palace. But what specific context? We're at the unveiling of a statue. The statue is of the first ever woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I know some of you know who she is. 1905, before World War I. Erased from our consciousness, just as much of the Korean War and Nogunri is erased. Bertha von Suttner. First time a woman, a physical monument of woman goes into the Peace Palace is on the Peace Palace's 100th anniversary. Now, if you go into the Peace Palace, you'll see, Ike like a Lady Justice, right? Not actual women, but like iconography, not actual laborers for values. So that happens in 2013. And here's the story of how I meet Dr. Chung. We're both at this unveiling. I don't know who he is, but bathrooms are always involved, it seems. Bathrooms are so important to history as well. And both of us are, in the bathroom area, and he's trying to, push open the door, but to get out, you pull the door. So I pulled the door. Oh, thank you. I said, where are you from? He said, Korea. And I said, Korea, amazing, because tomorrow, this is in The Hague, remember, I'm going to the Ijun Peace Museum. I don't know, the International Network of Museums for Peace, Roy Tamashiro, you can talk more about it. Oh, what is that? Ijun Peace Museum. That is a museum dedicated to the Korean delegation to the 1907 Hague Peace Conference, when Korea was colonized by Japan. It's a long story, guys. Okay. My bumper sticker here is that what we do at the Korean Foundation is we excavate untold stories of the peace through law, peace through education, what have you, movements. Untold stories, particularly of individuals, because it's individuals who are the bearers of values. It's individuals who work on a monument. It's individuals working on a convention or a treaty. And those individuals are driven by values and virtues. So public history, which is in the title of this talk, and we've been talking about history. And someone said, we learn history so that we do not repeat its mistakes. And we should learn history so that we repeat what is correct decisions. It's not just negative. We should learn history to repeat what we get right from time to time. I call that positive history. It's what we do at the Korean War Foundation. It's what I do in the classroom. It is what Nogunri is. Nogunri is both a tragic story and a story of virtue. That brings me to the second concept in the title. We have public history, we have moral injury, and we have restorative justice. Public history, that's just about, what is that? That's broadening the narrative so that individual voices, and not just academics, diplomats, what have you, are inputting into the narrative storyline of our past. Ordinary people. And it's ordinary people who are driving the Nogunri story. It is the victims. And it's in particular Chung Eun-young, who wrote a book, which we brought some. This is the English translation that we just published. Chung Eun-young, Chung Kudo's father, whose wife was shot, who lost 2 of his children, and as Chung Kudo was explaining, there he is, this morning, he grew up seeing his mother suffer because she lost 2 children. So, what do? And Chung Eun-young was not there at Nogunri. He hears about it from his wife when they finally reunite. And said, oh, finally, where are the children? They're gone, 2-year-old, 5-year-old. It's a long story, guys. And so moral injury. So public history includes ordinary voices, and this is connected to moral injury, because what is moral injury? Moral injury, and we just came from Philadelphia, even though we're from Michigan. We're in Philadelphia doing what we call a memory parlor. That's what we do. What do we do at a memory parlor? We get work done on our memories, and in particular, talk about positive history. Very interdisciplinary enterprise. And we soft launched this book yesterday. Some of you may have heard of So Jae-pil, or Philip Jason, the first Korean to become an American citizen. He's from Media, Pennsylvania. His house is there. We soft launched the book there yesterday. Dr. Pop is the translator of this book. It's riveting, powerful. So this is about ordinary voices being inputted into the ecosystem of narratives that we call history. And moral injury is fundamentally about betrayal. It's a betrayal of trust. And it was one of our sessions yesterday, Dr. Mindy Fullilove, a PhD MD psychiatrist, explained it this way. And she said, you can suffer from moral injury either from a commission, you perform an act, or you fail to perform an act. And there's so many stories of moral injury having to do with the Nogunri incident. And Chung Un-yang, I think, had to tell the story. He would have committed moral injury unto himself if he had not written this book, because it was so to his core that this story had to be told. He's the one to tell it. And he's doing it at a time where it's not convenient to tell this story in Korea because of, you know, military dictatorships and so forth. So Chung Un-yeon writes the book called Do You Know Our Pain? Okay. And had he not done that, he would have suffered moral injury because he would have failed to do what he knows needs to be done to do the right thing, which is to get the truth out. Okay. That also fell on me because when I met his son, Chung Kudo, and Chung Kudo started to tell me about Nogunri. And on the stage you'll hear from Randall Olson, who 10 years ago, as my student, we were at Nogunri and participated in the Nogunri Peace Academy. It's tragic, but there's also a story about value and virtue. And that's what moral injury is about. Repairing moral injury is about sharing the story. So this is called the communalization of trauma. When you receive moral injury, how do you heal it? You share the story. And so Chung Un-yeon writes the book. Chung Kudo is like very much helping to get the book out, right? The book is finally out, contacting the press in Korea, internationally, and then AP story, bilateral investigation, Nogunri Peace Park, Nogunri Peace Academy, and here we are. Okay. So, 3 concepts. Public history, which is broadening so that ordinary voices are part of the ecosystem of narratives. Moral injury. You can commit injury to yourself if you violate your conscience, if you violate your principles. You are harming yourself. This is actually an ancient Greek philosophy, which is what I was originally trained in. Socrates says, you're actually harming yourself when you harm someone else. It's a long story. But the word is moral injury. Jonathan Shea, who's MD, PhD, wrote several books. One is Achilles in Vietnam, where he's also a classicist and saw these parallels between the epics of Homer and the injuries suffered by the Vietnam vets he was counseling. So if you want, a source on moral injury, it's Jonathan Shea's work. But you can do that if you do something that violates your principles, or you don't do something that your principles tell you you should do. And finally, restorative justice. So I'm originally trained in philosophy. As we said yesterday at the memory parlor, justice, human rights, peace, in law there's a thing called a bundle concept. When you learn property, you learn property is a bundle of rights. Property is a bundle of rights. Right to exclude, right to sell. So when someone comes on trespass, I can say, no, you can't come on. So it's a bundle of rights. Peace is a bundle concept. It includes human rights. It includes listening. It may include forgiveness in the case of Nogunri. There are stories of that. These are very complex things. So restorative justice, justice is a very complex concept. We can talk about justice as retribution, justice in terms of distribution of resources, that's called distributive justice, retributive justice, restorative justice. Well, it should also be about healing. It's not just, I have to, sue this person in court and get my revenge. No, it's also about healing. And the International Criminal Court, which is in The Hague, why? Because that's where the first plank is set to build this, what's called a normative framework, to have a more, the catchphrase of the movement was organize the world. This is 1899, people. Or organize the world. Like it's not well organized because we're like engaged in these activities that create intergenerational trauma. And so we begin to build the first Geneva Convention, the second Geneva Convention. The Geneva Conventions 3rd and 4th, very important. Those Geneva Conventions don't come into existence until August 1949. And they're not ratified by the United States until 1955, which is after the Armistice Agreement. Okay, so this is really important, it's complicated. So, we did bring some books, Forgotten Pain, there's a thing like I was told to blend, in the interest of time, the book announcement, but thanks to Dr. Pak, the Court de Brazza Foundation did produce, and we launched it yesterday, the first English translation of Chung Eun-young's memoir, which began the process, which is why we're here today. So all of you who are teachers will get one for free. Okay, and Dr. Chung will give them to you. Okay? And so after me, I believe, is Dr. Pak. So I will turn it over to Dr. Pak with his comments. He is the translator, by the way.
Thank you, Dr. May. I go by the name Won Pak. I am a political scientist, and I'm going to keep things very simple. Nogunli is a historical event, untold for almost 50 years, unknown to the West until about 2 weeks ago. Why? The story of Nogunli, the family narrative, was never translated to any other languages until today. Now, first about the title. Korean title is very direct. It is literally translated as, you know our pain? And while I was translating, I was debating what could be a very appropriate title. And as already mentioned, the Korean War, which is often referred to as a forgotten war. By the way, it is never forgotten by the people who fought it, who suffered it. Okay. Nogunli can be viewed as a small speck in a 3-year and a 1-month war that caused over 5 million casualties, both military and civilian. Okay? It is first racially unified war by the US. Yes, it began with North Korean invasion of South Korea, but toward the end, it was literally fought by the US and the United Forces, and China with a very small help with North Korea. Because by the total of the end of the Korean War, 83% of North Korean troops were already dead. They had the highest casualty rate of any troops. So it is not really a Korean War, but actually 19 nations fought the war. 16 United Nations troops, okay, along with South Korea, North Korea, and People's Republic of China. Did you notice that China sent 2.3 million troops during the war and suffered more than 400,000 dead, not injured included, no other missing. Okay. They had the highest number of casualties, and North Korea had highest rate of casualties. As I mentioned, 83%. Both US and South Korea suffered about 10% casualties dead. There are about 60,000 for South Korea and almost 40,000 for United States. Okay. Now, you heard about the Yeongdong battle, you heard about the Nogunli, but let me just make a few points that led to Nogunli and the incidents or the massacres or whatever you want to call it. Issue number one, the war in Korea happened very rapidly in progression. June 25th was the beginning of the war. At 4 a.m., do you know what day of the week June 25th is? Guess. What day? War happens on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. What day of the week was it? Sunday, people go to church. You have a day off. The war began at 4 a.m. on Sunday, June 25th. The capital city of Seoul fell in 3 days. But North Korea rested for 3 days in Seoul. There was still question mark as to what happened during those 3 days. Okay. Nonetheless, it bought time, as Truman's grandson mentioned. President Truman said, send the troops in, soon as he heard. And the first troops arrived, okay, in Daejeon, July 19th. That's when we talk about the Yeongdong battle, but I consider the Battle of Daejeon, where the capital from the Seoul was moved to Daejeon initially. Okay? And the Daejeon battle was the first encounter or the entry of the US troops to the Korean War. That began on July 19th. Yeongdong began in 22nd. And Nogunli began on the 25th and ended on the 29th. Okay? I like the numbers. Okay? That is, in 13 days, Battle of Daejeon, Battle of Yeongdong, and then Nogunli incidents. It happened very rapidly. Okay? So I do want to mention issue number one. Things happen real fast. Okay? The North Korean onslaught. First U.S. troop entry into the war resulted in a devastating defeat. You talk about the casualty of Yeongdong. If you count the casualty of Daejeon, Yeongdong, and Nogunli area, it accounts for about 20,000 casualty of U.S. troops in the first 2 weeks of the battle. Okay, so that is the issue number one. People were in a chaos. Troops were retreating in chaos. By the way, they were young American soldiers, untrained, unprepared, had never seen the combats before. In other words, you're plucked from like Nebraska or Michigan, in about 2 weeks you end up in South Korea, not knowing where they were or what they were doing. So they were, in my point of view, very unprepared. I'm glad to say that now the general tyranny is gone. Okay. Number two, second issue. In this state of chaos, there were a lot of confusions. You have to imagine the situation. There were droves, thousands of refugees fleeing from the communists. Okay? And they were overflowing the highways, the railways, every ways to south. Okay? The second issue is a mix of refugees in thousands and North Korean infiltrator soldiers infiltrating into the refugees. Okay? In other words, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to tell who are the refugees and who are the North Korean soldiers. Issue number three, as I mentioned, American soldiers fought valiantly, but they were withdrawing rapidly after a few encounters. Okay? And in that encounter, they came with this problem, as I mentioned already, the North Korean troops infiltrating their rear guard. Okay? You heard from the general during the Battle of Yeongdong, told by the General Walker, commander of the 8th Corps, to the General Gay, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Okay? Hey, there's nobody behind you. There's no supporting troops behind you. He told this at the Yeongdong. Okay? Up to you to find out your own escape routes. Okay? But try to hold on to Yeongdong. And guess what? North Korea infiltrated the rear guard of the US troops, and they're causing more chaos. So the issue number three, they came to a certain tentative conclusion. Since US troops could not tell who were the refugees, who were the North Koreans, they came with the tentative decision. There's some refusal as to this really happened. But I'm going to quote. They said, shoot anybody on the front line of the battle. Shoot anybody on the front line. Okay, because we could not tell who were who. Okay? But it gave a caution. Use of discretion if there are women and children. Okay? So shoot first order came down from somewhere. But nobody claims that I made the call from the US authorities. Okay? So that's issue number three. Issue number four is we mentioned and seen the tunnel of the Nogunli, those twin tunnels, and there were a lot of dead bodies, and also a lot of people escaped the tunnel. Okay. By the way, as my Hollywood friends talked about, it's a family affairs. Chung family suffered gravely. Not his father Chung Eun-yong, but his older brother also suffered gravely. Older brother's wife was killed at Nogunli, and so were the daughters who got killed. Okay, not to mention, Chung's older brother and the older sister who perished. Okay, by the way, the son, Gu Pil, was killed while fleeing with his mother by African American soldiers. Okay, because Korean War was the first integrated U.S. forces. So the question was, were there North Korean troops in the tunnel? There's some debate. Some say yes, some say no, and I say I don't know. There is a circumstantial evidence, okay? When Arthur's nephew was escaping as a refugee, he met a North Korean soldier who told him the followings. It's in the handout. That's right. We were in Nogunli. This is a direct quote. I'm not trying to use a nasty word. Kicking the bastard American soldiers' ass. When we went into the tunnel, many comrades, I underline the word comrades, this is spoken by a North Korean soldier, were killed by those bastards. And the area was littered with dead bodies. Few comrades were still alive in the tunnel, so we saved them. Okay. So we do not know for sure if there was, and if so, how many. That is not conclusive. But the circumstantial evidence suggests there may have been unidentified bodies found in the tunnel. Whether they were the refugee from the outside of Nogunli, whether they were the North Korean soldiers, is still, in my point of view, unknown. And some say, when we had this same discussion yesterday in Philadelphia, in the Jason's house, it doesn't matter. They were killed. And the main point, one of the main point of Dr. May's and Chung's paper is moral injury. Okay, shoot or not to shoot, commission or omission. Okay, nonetheless, the end result did not change. Whether they were North Korean soldiers or not, the end result were the same. So, and finally, when it comes to the retroactive justice, this is where the Mr. Dr. Chung is making a great effort. In my point of view, as I translate the novel, by the way, I met Dr. Chung more than 10 years ago when I went to Nogunli. I knew about the incidents a long time ago. I'm a political scientist. I'm not a novelist or a translator, but I had a keen feeling in my heart. The truth is hidden in those valleys, in the tunnel. You know what? Truth has to be revealed. Because truth will be revealed, but sometimes they need some help. In other words, I am here not pointing who's right, who's wrong, who shot and who got shot, but it is to tell the truth about what happened and trying to heal together in a retroactive justice way. We got victims, in my point of view, the peoples of Nogunli, and also the soldiers who fought there. Okay? In other words, the community of the area. Okay? Both maybe whole South Korea. And the victims, in my point of view, not just the refugees, but also the people who were at the battle from the US side, because there are still missing remains. And in the battle of the Daejeon, Yeongdong, and Nogunli, over 2,000 casualties of the US troops, with still many remains in the area. So there has to be a, not just understanding, but cooperative effort to heal together, okay, the scars and the pains, okay, of 75 years ago. So with that, that's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope May and Professor. I'm Lloyd Kamashiro. I'm a professor emeritus at Webster University, retired from Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. I first met Dr. Chung in 2011. He came to Barcelona, where we were having a meeting of the International Network of Museums for Peace. And he shared with us the story of Nogunri and made a proposal that the next international conference should be held at Nogunri. And it took about a year to discuss, to deliberate on that. And that got realized. The International Network of Museums for Peace was hosted by Professor Chung and Nogunri Peace Foundation in 2014. I met Hope May at that same event in The Hague, and the community, we formed a kind of a community there, and I followed Hope May's work over the years. It's really great to reconnect. I met Randy at 2015 when he came to the Academy. My remarks are basically on the project, the research that Hope May and Dr. Chung put together for the session. The full paper is in the program. So my comments are kind of elaborating on some of the concepts. I want to really extend my gratitude and warm congratulations to Hope May and Dr. Chung for this. It's really a remarkable and humane analysis of the movement to raise awareness about the Nogunri tragedy. The paper presentation spotlights the decades-long efforts of survivors, bereaved families, and organizational partners to transform one of the darkest moments of the Korean War into a foundation for peace, memory, and restorative justice. What stands out most profoundly is the imperative to grant authority to ordinary people, the witnesses and memory keepers, as central agents of historical understanding. From this perspective, the truth about Nogunri was not produced by official commissions or historians. It was excavated, made known, and made sacred over decades by those who suffered most. From Chung Il-young's first petitions in 1960 to the publication of Do You Know Our Pain, to the international outreach, their essay traces how ordinary people refused silence despite taboos and threats of retaliation. The notion of public history from below is a practice of moral courage, persistence, and commitment to truth when it was and continues to be politically unpopular and personally dangerous to speak it. Such moral courage is resounding loudly in New York City at the People's Summit for Korea, happening now, this weekend, in the face of our own governments, mainstream institution, and the media, the imperialist structures that censor, silence, and erase authentic and honest understandings of our history and our legacies. Equally important is the essay's insightful exploration of the communalization of trauma, a concept that resonates throughout today's memorial forum. The authors demonstrate that confronting the legacy of Nogunri has never been a simple matter of establishing legal responsibility or assigning blame. Rather, it has involved cultivating spaces through literature, the media, memorials, churches, pilgrimage journeys, and school and university classrooms, where truth can be shared, heard, and held in community. Even when the efforts encounter painful setbacks or disappointments, they offer opportunities for the victims and the perpetrators alike to acknowledge shared grief and moral injury. By documenting these processes, the authors show how trauma can be transformed from isolated private suffering into communal solidarity for remembering, grieving, and learning. The essay is powerful in its nuanced discussion of forgiveness and reconciliation. It does not sentimentalize these concepts. Instead, everyone, perpetrators, victims, witnessing, and anyone learning about Nogunri today, we all struggle with our own ethical choices and quest for human dignity. One's choice to forgive those who inflicted harm may emerge even after decades of denial, erasure, blame, and continuing injustices. Forgiveness is offered not as a demand imposed from the outside, but as a recognition of the collective trauma where one can acknowledge, grieve, and memorialize the still largely unreconciled traumatic reverberations in the legacy of Nogunri. The author's treatment of this aspect of the Nogunri spirit honors both the victim's agency and the humanity of the perpetrators. They recognize the broader challenge of addressing humanity's imperfection, even among those who inflict harm. Moreover, the essay's historical review is admirably comprehensive and clear. It avoids easy binaries of victim and perpetrator, acknowledging both the sacrifices of US soldiers in the Korean War and the unhealed wounds caused by the massacre. It shows even well-intentioned efforts like President Clinton's statement of regret or the construction of memorials fell short when victims' voices were not fully included in the decision-making. By highlighting these tensions, the paper calls the audience to reflect critically on what genuine accountability and restorative justice require. Finally, the essay is itself a remarkable act of listening. It carefully gathers and conveys the testimony, documents, and reflections of those who fought for decades to make the Nogunri tragedy part of our shared moral memory. In doing so, it models the very practices of communalized trauma and public history from below, which the paper describes. This is not just a scholarly contribution, but a profoundly ethical one. In sum, I offer my heartfelt thanks to the authors for this illuminating and compassionate work. Your essay stands as an important historical document in its own right, a testimony to the dignity of Nogunri victims and the possibility of transforming even the most painful histories into opportunities for shared truth, mourning, and a more just peace. May this work inspire further dialogue, research, and cooperation between Korea, the United States, and the broader world in acknowledging, remembering, and healing the still unreconciled traumas of war. The summit affirms, I'll just stop right there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. So my name is Randall Olson, and as both Hope and Dr. Roy over here have mentioned, I first encountered the Nogunri story back in 2015. So I was invited to participate in the International Peace Academy, which was held at the Nogunri Peace Park. And it was actually my first encounter with Korean history in any significant way. So it was like a bombshell to discover as my kind of foot in the door to this whole, to an entire nation's history as like, this is where we're starting. Now, I want to make a special thank you to Dr. Chung, whose particular will and vision brought this to life for me, because the story of Korea has informed my entire framework for international relations and international history. And so, as I spoke with some of you earlier, both in the elevators and in the hallway, it turns out many of us here have been to the Nogunri Peace Park, the memorial and the massacre site. And when I was there, I remember experiencing both the weight of what had happened there, but also the deeper silence and quiet that had followed. That experience marked a turning point for me in how I understood public history. And it was not just a preservation of memory, but it was something there's a moral obligation that goes along with events like this. Now, at the time, I had recently lost my father, and so I had an internal relationship with grief that I was getting to explore in this space of collective grief. And so I wanted to start by exploring the same three frames that we've been going through in session 2 here. And the first is related to public history. So for me, one of the things to highlight that makes Nogunri different than a footnote in a textbook is that it refuses to stay varied. It's something that people are still talking about, especially due to conferences like this and folks like we've been discussing and will be doing so more. The survivor testimonies, the memorials, the historical research, these things reclaim narrative space in a way that's protecting them from erasure. And in this context, the public history is more than an academic activity. It proves that the victims' lives continue to matter, and it demands from us that we integrate these lessons into the stories that we tell, both about our nations and about ourselves. I want to look again at the frame of moral injury. So one of the things that the term has often been applied to in other areas of my research is related to veterans who witnessed or participated in actions whereby their moral frameworks were shattered. This sort of framing is usually involved in post-traumatic stress. But I believe moral injury expands beyond the battlefield, and when governments deny, delay, or distort the truth, they inflict a secondary injury, not only on the victims and the survivors, but on everyone who inherit a wounded history. And there's unresolved pain and the burden of unspoken truths that get buried into the narrative of what has happened leading up to where we are today. So the book, Forgotten Pain, an Untold Story of the Korean War, helps to remedy that wounded history. And special thanks to Dr. Pak for making it possible for me to read that book. translator. I needed the English version. The last frame that we've been exploring in this session is restorative justice, and just want to in a sentence, it's shifting the focus away from the crime and into the healing. And this restoration is not the same as a resolution. There's no way to undo what happened. But restorative justice begins with a recognition and with listening and with repairing dignity, however late it may come. It's a practice that's rooted in humility, and it shifts the moral center back to those who were silenced. And the Korean War is something that's often called the Forgotten War. We even have that on a memorial in our city in Mount Pleasant. It says the Forgotten War. But our efforts here today offer evidence that that narrative is changing and beginning to remember again. So as someone who's working in public service and civic life, I often think about what it means to be accountable to history. I think it's not enough to simply remember. Our memory must inform and shape our actions. And since we are the institutions, we think of organizations, we think of government agencies, we think of bureaus and divisions. These are groups of people. And groups of people are made up of individual people. And we have to inform ourselves, and then that information becomes who we are, and then changes the decisions we make. And over time, 1,000 little decisions create big changes. And those sorts of things, informed by memory, inform our laws. They inform our education. And our memory must inform our relationships across communities and nations. Otherwise, public history is at risk of being a ritual without responsibility. And when we restore honor to victims, not symbolically, but through meaningfully acknowledging and sets of sustained actions, we do more than correct the record. We begin to heal the civic fabric that was torn by silence. We say that truth matters and that lives lost in the margins still call us to moral clarity. I'd like to believe that that's what we're doing here today. So I'd like to end by just returning to the site of Nogunri and remembering it not just as a place or location of a tragedy, but as a living moral landmark. And for me, and for many of the others who are in this room who have stood there, it's not just a place of mourning, it's a place of invitation. It's an invitation to remember differently, to remember more completely, to engage in history, not as something finished, but as something still being written by what we choose to see and by what we refuse to forget. Thank you.
It's lunchtime, but I will speak 3 or 4 minutes on my essay. As Professor Hope may explained, restorative justice refers to a process where victims of both Korea and the United States restore their relationship and human dignity for healing and reconciliation. The Battle of Yeongdong occurred in 영동군, 충청북도 in July 1950, was a decisive and successful operation that saved up 8 days of precious time to set up the Busan perimeter. However, it has been rarely recognized in history. While about 400 US soldiers were killed or missing in action during the Battle of Yeongdong, about 400 refugees were sacrificed during the Nogunli incident. It was almost about the same time. In this sense, 2 incidents are closely connected to each other in terms of time and location, and clearly show the tragic and chaotic nature of war. So various efforts have been put to commemorate Nogunli victims and restore their honor. Unfortunately, however, there is no official commemoration facilities for U.S. soldiers sacrificed during the Battle of Yeongdong. Therefore, we'd like to carry out projects for Korea-U.S. joint commemoration and healing in stage-by-stage approach. In commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Korean War and the Nogunli incident, the Nogunli International Peace Foundation plans to carry out following projects to restore the honor of U.S. soldiers sacrificed during the Battle of Yeongdong and achieve restorative justice in close cooperation with the Association of the Bereaved Families of the Nogunli victims. 1. Conduct a joint Korean-U.S. study on the Battle of Yeongdong to shed new light on it. 2. Hold a joint commemoration events at Nogunli Peace Park on July 25th, the day on which the largest number of U.S. soldiers' casualties occurred during the 8-day Battle of Yeongdong. And 5 days of Nogunli or on July 26th, when the greatest number of victims were killed during the 5-day Nogunli incident, or on both days by designating Korea-U.S. joint commemoration days. 3. Establish memorial tower within the Nogunli Peace Park to honor about 400 U.S. soldiers who lost their lives in the Battle of Yeongdong, listing their names. 4. Develop various initiatives to promote Korea-U.S. friendship and exchange, such as constructing a Korea-U.S. friendship hall within the Nogunli Peace Park, in close cooperation with governments and citizens of both Korea and the United States. 5. Establish a regularly held Nogunli International Peace Forum to suggest global model on Korean-U.S. cooperation to address unresolved issues over the past. 6. Develop and publish English language educational materials on the Nogunli incident and the Battle of Yeongdong to ensure international awareness and help prevent future tragedies. The projects that I mentioned before are not just abstract slogans. I do hope that the Nogunli Peace Park is established at the site of the Nogunli incident can be praised not only for the Nogunli victims but also for the U.S. soldiers deployed to Korea who barely knew the name of Korea but fought for the freedom of Korean people. Furthermore, I wish the park to be a living place for peace and respect for life, where restorative justice can be practiced, and a symbolic place for Korea-U.S. friendship. Once again, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of you attending this forum and ask for your continued interest and support for the project for Korea-U.S. joint commemoration and healing that I mentioned before. Thank you very much.
introduction of your book. Also, distinguished guests, I kindly ask for a big applause to the commentators and presenters of this session too. This concludes our session 2. I wish it was a valuable time for all of us to learn more about Nogunli incident. And also for afternoon session, we'll be inviting a 96 years old Korean War veteran, Mr. Baker. So distinguished guests, I wish you remain throughout the whole session, throughout the whole events. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a great news that the delicious lunch for us is ready. We kindly ask that you all seniors, children, and women to proceed first. Thank you for your courtesy and cooperation.